we don't give them an opportunity to think ahead about what might be coming up, the anxiety could just keep increasing. Going to meet a lot of individuals where I'm not prepared might feel like a 5 out of 5 on my feelings chart. I do have some clients that I work with where sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, we prepared questions ahead. And I'm like, well, did you think about who was going to be there though? If you're just in the car, these could be questions that we can ask each other, right? If we're driving, and let's say we're heading to the store, we can ask, who might be at this store? What questions might they ask?
Welcome back to another episode of the Unspoken Words podcast, a Selective Mutism podcast by the Smart Center, produced and published once again by New Edition Productions. This episode features Dr. Elisa Shipon-Blum and Dr. Jenna Blum, the director and lead clinical psychologist at the Smart Center's growing counseling and assessments department, on the power of preparation, why simple action plans can dramatically lower anxiety and unlock communication for children, teens, and adults with selective mutism. Dr. E and Dr. Jenna explore why uncertainty and the fear of the unknown often fuels anxiety to the point of actual shutdown, why a child can be thrilled about a birthday party all week and then go to the party and then completely shut down the moment they arrive, and why, quote-unquote, just be brave and talk misses what these individuals actually need. This episode also explores the key to comfort, connection, and confidence, which is preparation. We walk through the building of who, what, where action plans, mapping who will be there, what each person might ask, tailoring responses across the social communication bridge, and bringing a child into conversation through the SM triangle and verbal intermediary. Lastly, Dr. E and Dr. Jenna explore the copy back strategy, I am and I just statements, sandwich questions, road mapping overwhelming events, and the popular look, listen, and learn approach. A lot of great stuff in this episode, so let's just get right into it. And make sure you're following the podcast on Instagram at @unspoken_podcast and over on YouTube at Unspoken Words Podcast by Dr. E. All right, without further ado, please enjoy the latest episode of the Unspoken Words Podcast.
Before we get started with the episode, you're exhausted from advocating, explaining, and hoping someone finally understands. Well, we do. This summer, consider Communicamp for you and your family. Communicamp is the Smart Center's intensive all-day treatment program designed to help children and teens ages 3 and up build social communication confidence. Over the course of one full weekend, your child or teen receives 15 plus hours of expert-led skill building, while parents receive 15 plus hours of training and support. Our clinicians use Dr. E's evidence-based treatment, SCAT, that's helped thousands of individuals find their voice. Here's what matters. Unlike other programs, your child or teen doesn't need to talk to come to camp. We meet them exactly where they are. We have 3 Communicamp weekends happening this summer, June 26th to 29th, July 16th to 19th, and August 7th to 10th. Visit the link in this episode's show notes to learn more. Stop waiting for your child or teen to grow out of it. Make it happen this summer. All right, enjoy the episode.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Unspoken Words. Hello, Dr. Jenna. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm great. The weather's amazing. It's a great day. I'm going to see my granddaughter after this podcast taping, so I'm excited. Good morning. So today we're going to talk about the power of preparation, why action plans reduced anxiety in children and teens with selective mutism. I could say adults as well, right? For any individual with selective mutism. So let's talk about it. Why do you feel preparing is so important?
I think that preparing is important because when we think about anxiety in general, I feel like a lot of times it's this fear of the unknown, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen. And many of our kids, because selective mutism is a social communication anxiety, many of our kids, teens, and even adults maybe feel this lack of preparation. They don't know what to expect. So the preparation is so key because if we don't prepare, right, if we don't give them an opportunity to think ahead about what might be coming up, the anxiety could just keep increasing. So once we attend an event or we go somewhere, the anxiety is so high that there's no ability for us to have even a little bit of that social engagement. So I think it stems from the fact that when our anxiety is so high, right, that fear of the unknown, that's why it's so important to have more of that preparation.
And that brings me back to that be brave to talk, right? If a child is not ready, if an individual is not ready to talk, they're just not there. Like you said, just imagine all of a sudden you're going somewhere, you're going to a family function. The child had no awareness to this. They were just like, come on, we're going to Aunt Sally's house. I mean, they may not even know who's going to be there because it's a big party, right? So they're caught off guard. That is the worst thing we can do with this population,
Yes.
is to have a situation that someone is not prepared. That doesn't mean you're sitting down writing in a journal, doesn't mean any of that. For some, it's practicing. Hey, we're going to Aunt Sally's house. Let's think about different social communication opportunities for the older child, teen, and adult, where they're like, I'll do interviews, I'll do my big five, I'll do my copy back, I'll do my I am and I just statements, I'll do my action plans, which is what we're going to talk about. But for younger children, just talking in advance of where are you going? Who's going to be there? What common questions could be asked? What's your answer to that? It could be done in a silent goal fashion where it's just talked about in general to help prepare, or writing it down, figuring it out, making it game like, getting points if that's what you're working on, and respecting the baseline stage of communication as our starting point. We don't want to keep someone at their baseline, but we need to respect where they're at as we bridge up, or loud, large, lots of people environments. We have to bridge down. So the key is that misconception of let's just be brave to talk when we're not there yet, or we're not prepared enough to be able to do it. Amazingly, for so many individuals, when that preparation is there, when they know what, when, where, and how, it's amazing how that fuels their social engagement and communication. So I think it's very important that when people are picking games and goals to do, that when they think about talking, you think about how do we prepare for that social communication opportunity to facilitate verbal communication. Some may be working on social engagement. When they first get somewhere, they're handing, they're taking, front line. Maybe they're using PVC, prepare visual choices, the SM triangle, bringing them in when someone asks a question through choice, however you're doing it. There's so many strategies and silent goals we work on with parents or caregivers where they're actively involved. So, Dr. Jenna, talk to us about why uncertainty fuels anxiety.
So, a lot of times I feel like it's important to think about this aspect because I think many times, as you're mentioning, so many times people are thinking, oh, my child just won't speak, right? And they're not really thinking about the underlying processing challenges that might be going on, which leads to a lot of that uncertainty. So, I think a lot of times kids or teens or adults have a lot of challenges with processing, right? There's too much time to think and process. And so, a lot of times that can lead to that shutdown. So definitely difficulty with processing is one. A lot of times, not only like difficult processing, but also sometimes our kids are slow processors. They might be like slow to retrieve that information. So when someone's asking them a question, they're still processing that. They're slower to kind of think about putting their thoughts together and then letting it out. So also not just difficulty with processing, but also thinking about how they might need that time to really slow themselves down. A lot of times we have kids that also have comorbidities with having social anxiety. So really that fear of making mistakes, fear of perception, how people are thinking about them, that could be playing a role. So the reason why, we want to be even more into preparation is because that uncertainty, they don't know what people are thinking behind the scenes. A lot of our kids also are perfectionists. We have a huge population of perfectionism. And I think that's a really big component because they want to say the right thing, they want to do the right thing. And so when they're uncertain about a scenario, it's almost impossible to be a perfectionist, quote unquote, because you don't know what to expect. So obviously, we always talk about perfectionism, how to kind of minimize some of those challenges, just because we can't be perfect at everything. We're all humans. And so that is a part of, there are interventions that we do to kind of help decrease some of those aspects. But I do think in general, because we have more of a perfectionistic population, it's important to think about how we want to, how do we want to work through that. I also think, again, because of the social anxiety piece, there's also just like social worries in general. I think in general, a lot of times when we think about how selective mutism is a social communication anxiety, we also think about how a lot of our kids just have other contributing factors like generalized anxiety, like social anxiety. So they might just be thinking in general about these social worries, right? That might be a big contributing factor. And so they're constantly thinking about all the aspects around them, which makes it really hard for them to be in the moment. And then again, like there's other aspects too. I mean, we have a lot of kids that also have some executive functioning challenges, like maybe an underlying ADHD. And that's really important too, because that uncertainty piece could feel really overwhelming. There could be so many parts that are going on when thinking about a social gathering. And so they're feeling flooded with overwhelm of uncertainty. And so that anxiety can obviously trigger up thinking about that. So listed a few. I mean, there's so many more that we can talk about in terms of why anxiety thrives, in uncertainty. But I think the biggest aspect and the biggest thing to think about is when, individuals don't know what to expect, their brains, right, must process multiple various, or multiple like variables simultaneously. There's a lot going on. And I think that's where we really want to kind of slow ourselves down, and so instead of just enjoying the event, many times they're managing this uncertainty. They're not really in the present moment. So preparation really allows us to be in the moment. It allows us to like slow ourselves down. It allows us to minimize our time to think and process, to minimize some of the social worries because we already know more of what to expect. We might not be as fearful around making mistakes because we're prepared a lot. That's why a lot of times you might notice kids might say, "Oh, going to meet a lot of individuals where I'm not prepared might feel like a 5 out of 5 on my feelings chart, right, of worry. But maybe standing in front of my whole classroom, and giving a presentation might feel like a 4 out of 5. It's still scary, but I had a lot of preparation to do that. So they're not feeling as nervous about going into that scenario. But those are some examples of how some children with SM might experience some of these difficulties in uncertainty.
Yeah, no, for sure. And when anxiety rises, communication becomes harder. How often do we hear my child or my teen, I use the word child to be child or teen, or the individual with SM, right? Is so excited to go to this event, right? A 12-year-old is super excited to go to this birthday party, talks about it all week, gets there and completely shuts down. And the parents like, I don't get it. We had rewards for him. He just completely shut down. I don't get it. What's going on? This is frustrating for me. It's frustrating for him. Why is he just not saying his big 5 words? Why is he not doing this? And when I back it up, because I often say when something isn't working, let's back up as to why. Did you talk about the event? Like, who's going to be there? No, he's fine with birthday parties. Okay. Did you know where he was going? No, we didn't know. We were going to this like art studio. And he's fine. He loves art at home. Did he know who was going to be there from was it his class? Oh, it was a neighborhood party. So when I talked to this parent, there was no preparation. It was just going to the party, didn't realize where it was, who was going to be there, didn't think about questions that they could possibly ask him. And he wasn't actively involved, right? As a 12-year-old, you can be actively involved. As a 5-year-old, you can be involved through the common question games, being ready for. So let's talk about that preparedness, because this is really the nature one of this podcast, but such an important part of what we do is
Mhm.
help. It's not just about getting someone to talk. It's about understanding what is needed to help that individual feel comfortable, confident, supported, and they become communicative and verbal when all these supports are there.
Mhm.
So instead of sending a child into an unknown situation, we can help prepare them. And I think about the action plan in a way of where are we going? So listeners, where are we going? Who's going to be there? What's the nature of that event? What questions might be asked? There are going to be different questions in different situations. What is your answer? What can I ask others? And to talk and think about that. Now, that's what you would do in therapy, and the parents would support this. And the older the individual, the more they're supporting it. But these are the things we do. So it's not about just going, it's preparing. So any thoughts on that, Dr. Jenna? Any examples you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think action plans are really important because I think, we talk a lot about how many of our children don't have this roadmap. And I think that's exactly what this action plan is, as you're saying. And I think that when I work through treatment with many individuals, and like you said, the older the individual, the more autonomous they are in creating their action plans. I can create an action plan every single session, right? So when I'm working with individuals, this is primarily a lot of times what I utilize to create this preparation. And no matter what a child or teen adult is doing, we can always think about an action plan, right? So for example, it's June 2nd today. I'm sure once it comes out, it will be maybe mid-June. And many of our children and teens are finishing up with school. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, it's summer break. So there's an action plan right there of potentially going to a cousin's graduation or going to a family barbecue. Maybe you're celebrating, July 4th with your family down at the beach, or maybe you're going to camp for the first time and you're really nervous about what to expect there. Those are all situations that you can break down into an action plan. We can slow it down. We could think about, okay, if you think about going to your cousin's graduation, right? Who's going to be there? Let's list them out. Then once we have all that list, right? Maybe it's cousin, aunt, uncle, grandparents, friends of my cousin, right? Maybe it's staff members if we're at a restaurant or something where they're hosting it. If we think about all those different people, then the next part is, well, what might they ask me? And the reason I also think it's important to differentiate who's going to be there and to be as specific as possible is many times different individuals might ask us different things. So, for example, if you have a same age cousin, they might ask you different things like, oh, like, what are you and your friends going to be up to over the summer? Or, oh, like, tell me about like what camp you're going to. I'm also going to a camp. Let's see if they're different, versus your aunt or uncle might ask you different questions compared to your cousin. Like they might ask you, oh, how was school? Or tell me about your favorite class, right? Your cousin might not ask you that question as much compared to your grandparents or compared to the staff members. Like, are you ready to order? What do you want to eat today? Right? So the reason it's important to break that down and why we don't want to actually minimize that step. I do have some clients that I work with where sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, we prepared questions ahead. And I'm like, well, did you think about who was going to be there though? And they're like, no. And then I was like, well, when we looked at your goals though, did you notice that we shut down right when uncle asked us a question? And I know we prepared questions, but one, we weren't expecting that question. And we also weren't thinking about how uncle might ask us a different question compared to like our grandparent or our cousin. So I do think that step is really important. And then the next piece of that is because many times, we find that it's really difficult to initiate compared to responding. We always want to be thinking about, even if we're not yet comfortable, even if we haven't yet stepped on the bridge, right? We always want to be thinking about what questions or things could we say if we feel comfortable. So if we feel comfortable and our cousin asks us, what we're doing over the summer, what do you think could be something we can ask them too? Like, do you think you'd want to know what they're doing over the summer? This is also a cousin who is having a graduation. So do we want to ask them maybe a question about what they're doing after graduation if we don't know, or if we know they're going to, a college, maybe we want to ask them a question about if they're excited or what college they're going to. So there's so many questions that we can dive into. So even if we're not comfortable asking the question, that's where a parent can come in and a parent can help bring us into communication. So I know in previous podcast, we've talked a lot about our SM triangle and how that's really important for a parent to kind of bring you into communication with that third person, because even if they don't feel comfortable going up to the child and saying, oh, what college are you into? A parent can turn and say, I know that we had some questions for you, Riley. Did we want to ask about what they're doing this summer, or do we want to ask about their college experience, right? And so that way it can help bring the child in, where we can either turn to mom. If we're verbal, we can say college experience. We can either turn to mom and use them as a verbal intermediary, where we can say college experience, and maybe mom can tell the person. Or if we're prepared, like we have been doing, we can always have that list of questions down and we could always point to it, or mom could prompt us for a head nod, right, which is our nonverbal communication. So again, these are all different examples of how we can bring your child into communication, honoring all stages on the bridge. So that's also, I know I broke that down a lot, but that's really what I love about an action plan is we can really slow ourselves down and have as much preparation as possible. So it's not about just memorizing a list, right? That's not the goal, but it's really to reduce this uncertainty. And so we want to be prepared as much as possible.
And we have, what I want our listeners to understand, that it's not just, this is what lowers anxiety. When people think about SM being an anxiety, a social communication anxiety, how do I lower anxiety? Do I just put my kid on meds? What do I do to lower their anxiety? The strategies are what's key in building the confidence, the connection, so that they know what, when, and where, and that lowers anxiety. So these strategies, like you were mentioning, copy back. Hi, how are you? Good. How are you? There's kids we work with that can't do that. They just go, good. What's going on? Nothing. So we have to teach them these I am, I just, copy back. They, in a relaxed setting, many know how to do this, but when they're not as comfortable, it's almost like they forget. So practicing through these different games through young children, different goals through older kids and adults, it's really important to, one, respect where they're at on the bridge. Now, a college student, interestingly enough, the older the individual, the less they have challenges being verbal. They just don't know what to say, when to say it, how to say it. They lack initiation, elaboration, expression, conversation starters. So we're working on different things with different individuals, and that's what treatment is. So when we're working through this action plan, we're not like, here's the action plan. We're helping them change their thoughts, their feelings, working with their feelings, how that affects their behaviors. We're working in so many ways to help support them, to give them the confidence to work on all of this. And again, the younger the child, the more it's very game-like and fun-like and written and drawn. It's very important that the visuals support this. So as we're talking about action plans, and I will say the young child version, or I do have adults that do this, use sandwich questions. So every action plan starts with hi, how are you? And ends with see you later, goodbye, whatever. Same with a sandwich, right? The top bun is hi, how are you? Or hi. The bottom is bye, have a great day. Whatever it is we decide to do in that moment. And we prepare for, many of my young kids have toys that are different sandwiches that look like a sandwich where the questions are inside, and they'll draw it. They'll have the toys that do represent it. I have adults that like to draw out the sandwich, and they'll have different sandwiches for Starbucks versus a family barbecue. And interestingly enough, if you can do this at Starbucks, you can do it at Dunkin' Donuts, you can do it at all different places, because it becomes very rote and very kind of scripted out. And then you let go of the visuals. You don't need them forever, but it's a way to help support them. And so I think that's really, important, that what we're talking about, the written worksheets that these individuals use, the older kids and adults, are very important. And the visuals the young children have through game playing, and the goals the parents have, because often, what do I give my child? But what are your goals as a parent to help support all of this? So again, the more that we prepare, the more we're lowering processing. A big part of SCAT is understanding the effect of anxiety and how so much of what we do minimizes the need to think and process. So it isn't just being brave or courageous. Yes, it is to a point, right? But some of our kids are brave and courageous handing a note to somebody, or using a parent as an intermediary, or shaping sounds into words, depending on where they're at on the bridge. But when you're anxious, I want our listeners to think about it. You don't think and process well. You get nervous. You almost shut down. It's like going into a speech and not being prepared,
Right.
or turning to someone in an audience and saying, hey, tell me what you think about global warming. Oh my gosh, I don't know anything about global warming. Tell me what you know. The panic that comes over them. Versus if they had a chance to prepare, maybe in a small group or one-on-one. It's about meeting these individuals where they're at, what can they do, and bridging up as we need to.
Mhm.
So many children and teens and adults struggle when they have to think quickly in a social situation. So if an individual knows the questions, knows the responses, their brain has less work to do. They don't shut down as much.
Mhm.
They're ready. They're less anxious. The response time improves. So it creates familiarity, it creates comfort, confidence. And what happens? They connect easier, they communicate easier.
Mhm.
It's pretty amazing how that works.
We'll get back to the episode in a second. If you have a child or teen with social communication challenges, listen up. For more than 20 years, the SMART Center has helped over 6,000 individuals overcome selective mutism. Now we're bringing our expertise to you in a new way. With our 6-week virtual social skills series, over 6 sessions, your child or teen will learn through activities, role plays, and real life practice by learning conversation starters, developing friendships, and managing social anxiety in a safe and supportive space. Our trained clinicians meet every child and teen where they are, whether nonverbal, finding their voice, or already verbal. We run new groups every few months. Visit the link in this episode's show notes to register your child or teen today. All right, let's get back to the episode.
So I thought you've talked about some real life examples, which are great because I want our listeners to think about maybe something that might be coming up for them to think about. As you said, it's the end of the school year. There's end of school year celebrations. There are assemblies, plays. There's so many opportunities to think and plan. And we talked about that roadmap. A roadmap can be an action plan, what, when, and where. But in terms of who's going to be there, what can they ask? The actual social communication roadmap. But then there's a roadmap to almost like the itinerary of the events of what's going to happen. So that's a separate podcast we can talk about. But I think about kids in school, they have a schedule. They know when they're doing this, when they're doing that, when lunch is, when snack is, when gym is, when computers are, when English arts are. They know when these activities occur in the course of their 6-hour day. Creating these kinds of roadmaps for someone that's having a friend over, when they're going somewhere, knowing what, when, and where is important. So it's a bit of a kind of offshoot. It's not a social communication action plan, but it's almost like a schedule of events roadmap so that the kids are prepared for what's happening next. And so we work through this. I'm thinking of a 13-year-old girl that I was working with, and we did an action plan. She was having a birthday party and she wanted to meet in the city. And they were meeting in the city and they were going to go into this little town and go from store to store. So we actually, in therapy, worked through what she was going to say when she saw her friends, but what stores they were going to go to, so that she had almost like a map. And that made her feel so secure.
Yeah.
And when they came over after that, what was the event going to be? What were they going to do? Because you can't just have kids come over. So she needed to have like kind of a schedule of what they were going to do and offering her friends some choices of what they wanted to do and have some things ready. It's amazing
Yeah.
how that was such a successful experience. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I actually, ironically, just had a session last night where we kind of did something similar, where it wasn't just creating an action plan of who's going to be there, what questions might people ask, but I was working with a family who, again, it's the end of the year, so they were having some friends come over to celebrate the end of the school year. She was very excited to finish her schooling and to have summer break. She's also a teenager, but again, this could apply for younger kids too. And it wasn't just the questions, because this was also someone that was a little bit more shut down, that wasn't really ready to have these back and forth conversations. Although we did prepare questions and we talked about the triangle of how mom's going to bring her in. And right now she's really working towards using mom as a verbal intermediary. However, as her volume level gets louder, we've talked about, that strategy that we've talked about in other podcasts, which is the did you get that? So we can always have mom help bring her to that third person. But one of the things that we talked about was not, like what you said, was not just the questions people might ask or what you can ask, but also what are the activities that you're going to be doing? Because I think for many of our children, teens, and adults, it's that uncertainty around just sitting there and not knowing what to expect, right? And that goes with even activities. Like, even if you're sitting at a table, having these structured activities are so crucial and provide a lot of certainty for a lot of these individuals, right? So we actually created a list of 6 different activities that she really enjoys. She loves crafting. So we talked about different activities that she likes to do. And we wrote down a list from 1 to 6. And I told them, I said, one thing we want to be thinking about is let's order this list, right? Let's think about, you wrote 6 things down. Let's think about ordering this from 1 being your favorite activity and 6 being your least favorite. And let's start with your most favorite activities. So for example, if you like, painting, or you like slime, or you like baking, right? Which one out of those three do you like the most, right? And let's say, this individual would have said she likes to bake. And I would say, great, that's the first thing that we want to do, because not only do we want to be prepared and do we want to be structured, but we also want our kids to feel confident and comfortable. And so we want to start with the things that they're most excited about, because that brings in more confidence and more comfort, because she actually is a lot, she's a very good baker and she's proud of herself for that. And some of her friends might not know how to bake. So she's way more confident in baking than she might be in making slime. She's interested in making slime and she thinks that would be a really fun activity, but she's way more confident in baking. She actually bakes a lot for her family at home. So that's definitely something that, we talked about.
Big
So
shot roll right there.
exactly, a big shot role. So you can see how all these strategies kind of overlap with each other, but the underlying aspect is really this uncertainty. We want to build more certainty. So now, not only is she prepared with who's going to be there, what questions might they ask, but now the parents are also practicing the store exposure, because they're going to the store to buy, chocolate chip cookie ingredients. And now she's so much more excited because she knows she's going to do an activity that she's stoked about. She's so excited about this activity. So again, an action plan, like you said, Dr. E, is so much more than just thinking of questions. It's also giving a roadmap, thinking about all the other underlying things that we could be thinking about for this type of friend get together.
I think about comfort, right? I think about connection, confidence, all of those ingredients. It fuels the communication. And it's so important for our listeners to understand it's not just go out and be brave. Of course, that's a part of it, right? To be brave. But I always say that courage isn't loud. It could be subtle, and we need to meet them where they're at. If we're rushing our kids and they're shutting down and they're avoidant, or they're crying and they're pushing back, or they're angry and they're yelling at you, or they're mean to you, they're telling you something. Look, listen, and learn. We just did a podcast on that. Look, listen, and learn. What are they telling us by their actions? If they're excited, they're willing to take a risk, they're willing to be brave, they're willing to do things, they seem happy about it, their response time is quicker, they're making progress. This is all great stuff. But if they're not, you got to back up and say, what is not working well? Why is this not working well? And that's where your therapist comes into play to really guide you through the nitty gritty. So to give a couple other kind of quick action plans, I'm thinking about traveling, right? We're planning a trip upcoming, right? One aspect of traveling that's hard is completely unknown, right? Where are we going? My gosh, it's a whole new city, a whole new country, maybe. But getting through the airport, that's a rough situation for many, because a lot of people will ask you questions and there's so many opportunities. But what if our kids don't talk, right? So thinking about going through an airport and what that is like in a roadmap, what's the first thing you're going to experience? Dropping off your bags, the ticket counter, going through security, having a letter maybe that is given to security if they ask questions to say my child has SM and they're not able to verbalize, if that's where your child is. We've done that for families. But it's important to really think about this so that they're participating at the level that they can participate, because as we've talked about, passenger in the car is what many of our kids are. And so I think about a lot of these action plans, roadmaps, as you were discussing, going on a vacation, going through security at an airport. Just every aspect of everything you do involves proactiveness. If your child is not on the front line, handing and taking, kind of open, meaning they're there to take questions from others and participating at the level that they can, even handing over a note together, handing something to somebody, even being brought in through the SM triangle, using a verbal intermediary, then what happens is they're the passenger in the car and they're not building those skills. So along the way with these action plans, with all the things we're doing to help them become a more confident social verbal communicator, will only be possible if they become involved in social encounters. Because so often I will hear from parents and even teachers, right? Oh, I don't want to ask questions. I don't want people to ask them questions. They can't do it. Well, guess what? If they're not asked questions, when are they going to ever be able to do it? So it's meeting them where they're at and respecting their stage on the bridge, and then bridging them up through the strategies, the interventions are really, really important. So every social encounter that you're going to experience, we can walk through it together.
Mhm.
We can go through exactly how your child, the teen, the adult will get through it. That's what therapy is. It's working through these challenges to become a more confident social verbal communicator, to reach their capacity.
Yeah.
It's so very important.
Mhm.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you said a lot of what I was thinking. I think it's just so important to really think about what your next few weeks look like and all the opportunities that you can have to create these action plans. I think many times families, when we first talk about it, it sounds like, oh wow, this is going to take a lot of time. This is going to be something that, we're going to have to like really sit down for 30 minutes and go over. And it takes some time for families to kind of buy into kind of this idea of like making an action plan. And I have families that will talk about it and then they'll come back and they'll be like, I'm sorry, Dr. Jenna, we didn't have time to do it. And I'll say, okay, well, let's like slow down. Let's think about when we can develop these action plans. And this should really become part of your everyday. For example, if you're just in the car, these could be questions that we can ask each other, right? If we're driving, and let's say we're heading to the store, we can ask, who might be at this store? What questions might they ask? So it doesn't have to be just for an event. It could also just be for like going to the store, going to a restaurant. A restaurant's a great place to practice action plans because there's so many predictable questions someone could ask, right? A waiter could ask you, what do you want to drink? What do you want to eat? Do you want any sides? Do you want any dessert? Do you want anything else? There's so many questions. And we can also ask a lot of different initiation questions. Like, can I have an extra straw? Can I have a to-go bag? Can we have the check? Where if we go to the hostess, we're 3 people, and kind of prepare for that. So I guess what I'm trying to emphasize is this should become kind of an everyday thing that we think about, and it should almost just become part of our routine. And once it becomes part of our routine, it's amazing how much like effortless, these types of action plans become because I think yeah.
Yeah, you're bringing up great points that this is about changing behaviors. This is about parents unlearning their enabling or their high expectation ways because it wasn't working for you. So
Mhm.
if you're coming to us for help, we're going to respect your life and what you have time to do, and we're going to do as much as we can in treatment to help prepare. So, as you said, in that session, we may develop action plans for the upcoming week. One of the things, or whatever strategy working on, this podcast is about action plans, but we may spend that session reviewing whatever strategy we're doing to help prepare you between now and the next time. What's coming up this week? Let's go through it. Let's walk through it so we're successful. Talking about what strategies and interventions you're going to use, talking about the parents' role in this. But one of the things that is really important, and we talk about this in previous podcasts, is structure, consistency, routine, and predictability. It all is interlinked, right? That all creates control. The more structured, the more predictable, the more routine. It really does create a calmness in individuals, knowing what, when, and where. So their life being that way through schedules, a big family calendar, putting on when the doctor's appointment is, when we're getting our hair cut, when we're going to the birthday party, when we're going to the family barbecue, when we're going shopping. And having that where the child or the teen is actively involved in that, where they're putting it on there, they're checking it off, we did it, is really important because that's going to help every member of the family. Because the last thing we want is, hey, it's Saturday, come on, we have a doctor's appointment. What? What? And the child had no idea. Let me tell you, that is a recipe for disaster. But if
Mhm.
they can see in advance where they're going, that's helpful. Sometimes I've said, Dr. Jenna, to some families is pick a day of the week that's not as busy, that you can kind of review the upcoming week in an upbeat way. Rather than you need to and you should do this, let's talk about how we even talk to our kids about it, right?
Mhm.
And calm, meeting them where they're at, the goals we're working on, the games we're going to play, the points we're going to get for younger kids, what we're going to be working towards, and in a way that makes them feel comfortable, safe, and supported rather than attacked and criticized. We have to be very careful because that you need to and you should language has to be eradicated from parents, because that pushes the child against a wall and does not welcome that
Yeah.
kind of feeling of support and acceptance. It actually pushes them away. So I talk about schedules because I might say, what is that day? And then I'll have a family. This happened just the other day where we picked Sunday. Sunday was a really laid back day for families. So they said Sunday around 4. So it seems like we're always home. It's before dinner, after they've kind of done things for the day. And they pick 4. They're kind of hanging out and they talk about the week's activities, what's coming up, what opportunities are there to play our games. Now, some kids need less, some individuals need less preparation. The more you prepare them, the more anxious they get. That's really a result of the dynamics that we have to help families with,
Mhm.
because the child feels very attacked. Maybe they are used to a way of high expectation.
Right.
So that's going to be a work in progress. But for the majority that we're working with, knowing in advance what's happening, just even talking about it is really helpful. So the knowing which day of the week and recording it. And then I often have them send me updates. So we have an update link and I'll say, hey, send me weekly updates. If they're not in the weekly psychotherapy program, or the biweekly psychotherapy program, because I only do the monthly SCAT program. So I will have them send me weekly updates, sometimes as much as they want, frankly, because I want to know what they're doing and it's making them accountable more to me. And that helps a lot of kids, a lot of individuals versus the parents telling them to do it. So, hey guys, what day of the week is good for you to send me an update?
Mhm.
Maybe we need to put it on our calendar, send Dr. E an update.
Yeah.
And so some kids will send their drawings, their bridges that they filled out, and it really lends itself to continuity between sessions, but it also is a way working together as a team. And
Yeah.
so you can see, listeners, how all of this just works together.
Yeah. And I also want to add to, you mentioned like the calendar and kind of this shows you all the things that we have coming up. And I think that's really important because one, you could start to see like the pockets of time when you're more free. Like let's say Tuesday we have soccer practice, Thursday we're going to see friends, Friday we have a dentist appointment, Saturday we have another birthday party, and then Sunday we're free. That shows us, oh, Sunday could be a day when we can kind of sit down and do that, but it also shows you all the preparation that we can do for all of those events, right? So like Monday night could be when we write down a list of questions people could ask us for soccer practice, right? Or like Wednesday could be when we make an action plan for the next day that we're seeing some of our family friends. But also, the thing that's important to note too is the more that we do action plans, the more that we start to see that they overlap a lot. And so that's why they really shouldn't take that much time. It should just
Right.
become second nature. And, like, for example, yes, there's nuanced questions that someone could ask you specifically at a birthday party compared to going to your camp, but some of them overlap, right? I mean, especially like based on the time of year. Once it hits July or August, many times the same questions are going to come up everywhere. You know, are you getting ready to go back to school? What grade are you going into? You know, what are you doing any like last minute travel plans? When are you going back to school shopping? You know, so many of these questions could be coming up. So I think that it's important to be thinking about even just generally what kind of an overall like action plan could be. So I think yes, it's important to create individual action plans, but then also you'll start to notice that many of them have very similar types of general themes, which I think really make it easier to actually approach anyone. Because if you, let's say, forget to do an action plan one day, but you've made 3 at your past events, it's that much easier for your child to have more certainty because now they're starting to think about what questions might people ask even without creating one too.
And yeah, no, I love that because it's true. And I find that once you do it, they're doing it in their head, a lot of
Yeah,
these kids.
exactly.
They eventually don't need the visuals. The
Right.
parent, and then they don't even prepare and they're ready for it. Now, life is such that you don't always know the question. Like you said, someone may ask an off the topic question, and then the child, what happens, right? You didn't prepare for that question. Well, I'll tell you what happens. If it's a question that's answerable, which most are, there's nothing wrong with what I call bridging down. So let's say you have a child that's answering verbally. They're able to answer these common questions. They've prepared with their action plan. Maybe they're doing interview or assignments or other sort of question answer opportunity with family members, to help kind of get the communication going, as I call it. All of a sudden, a question comes that you're not ready for. There's nothing wrong with a parent to bridge down to maybe now asking a choice. So someone might ask a question like, hey, I think you guys were like, thinking like something like, I'm just thinking of an example that occurred recently. Hey, last year you traveled somewhere. I'm thinking of traveling this year. Where'd you go? Now, that's not a question that you would think that somebody would ask you all of a sudden at a family function, because that was last year. But let's say the child is like, or the teen or whomever we're talking about kind of gets that look. Nothing wrong with saying, the parents saying, hey, hey, where did we go last year? Did we go to the Grand Canyon, or did we go to Costa Rica? Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong if a parent in the moment has to answer because the child can't remember, because a lot of times you don't remember what you did yesterday. So that little reminder is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Or even if it's socially inappropriate to turn to your college age student and give a choice question, just answer for them. It's okay. In that moment, your child didn't answer, not necessarily because of SM, but they couldn't remember where they went. They went many places last summer. It was an open-ended, thought-provoking question. So listeners, we're trying to loosen the rein here. We know that you want your individual that you're working, your child, your teen. I know as an adult, you want to become a confident verbal social communicator, but it takes some time and it takes deep understanding of who you are. Where are you on the bridge in different settings? What are the factors into why your communication is challenging? And what types of supports do you need? And what strategies and interventions are needed? And it becomes part of your life in a way that you don't even think about it after a while. The simple act of frontline and handover takeover is not hard. It's just changing your ways.
Right.
To make progress in anything, you need to change. And then it becomes more routine. Look, it's difficult sometimes to change your ways, right? But it's how change occurs, and it's how progress occurs.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with everything you say. And I think
I'm
as
glad
we're
you do. I'm glad you
yeah,
do.
and as we're finalizing, I think this episode, our hope is that you're really starting to learn, one, an incredible strategy that can go really, really, really far, but also how much preparation is key and how much we can really start to change our children's lives just by the subtlety of adding more of this preparation. It goes so far, and I think that it also gives your child the ability to be on that front line, like Dr. E said, but also be that driver in the driver's seat, like we always talk about, right? Where they can really start to take those steps and they could feel confident, and they could feel as prepared as possible, and we're putting trust in them, right? And I think that's really important. I think this was a great episode.
It was, but I have two things to say before we end.
Yeah, go ahead.
One is the parent that's sitting there listening to this going, but my child does not do well when we prepare a lot. It makes her more anxious. She gets more anxious when we talk a lot about it and we plan it. One, that's the value of therapy, because sometimes it has to be talked about, worked through in treatment. But also there's ways. I'm thinking about a lot of kids I've worked with where the parents say every time we practice, they get anxious. They don't want to do it. It's a fight. We can't do it. That's where you do it in therapy to prepare. You blame it on us. You send your updates, whatever. But it's also a way that you're driving. So mom, dad are driving in the car. Kids are in the back. You're going to Aunt Sally's house. Matter of factly, no big deal. You just kind of say, hey, we're going. Who do you think's going to be there? Like, sometimes different aunts and uncles are there. Or they hear their mom talk to Aunt Sally on the phone and go, who else is going to be there on Saturday when we go? So it's done silently, as I call it, behind the scenes, where the child isn't actively involved, but they're hearing it. What kind of questions? And maybe even directing it to the other sibling in the car if there's another one. What kind of things do you think they're going to ask us? So you're not directing it and preparing with written stuff with your particular child. You're talking about it in general. And in addition, you as a parent can prepare Aunt Sally, Uncle Bill, maybe Grandma Tess, whomever it is, to ask some general common questions at the event. Maybe they've talked about common questions, but now you're telling others to ask these common questions, because that way your child has the opportunity. And whatever stage they're at on the bridge, whether the parent is not, whether it's nonverbal, an intermediary, you give a little extra time, you avoid eye contact, you've shared the About My Child worksheet with them so they know not to focus on the child first, maybe the sibling first. gives the child a chance to process the information. I can go on and on, listeners, really. Give me a question, give me a scenario. I can go on and on about ways to kind of work with your child that works best for them, because what works for one may not necessarily work for another. And that's very important. And we have to meet them where they're at developmentally and cognitively as well. And just one last thing is that it's important to review these events. What went well? Why did it go well? What didn't go well? Why did it not go well? What was hard about it? What was easy about it? Talking about this in treatment is really important because it helps them feel confident in sense that like what they were able to do, but we don't want them to feel defeated by what they couldn't do. But we try to figure out maybe what wasn't done. Was it a loud, large, lots of people environment? Were the parents taking the kids out at a time when the child was just busy and came back from a full day of school or camp and they're tired and it's, come on, we need to do our goals? Were they hungry? Were they not ready for it? You know what I mean? Like there's so many reasons why something goes well, but so many reasons why it may not. And once you start to realize, look, listen, and learn, then all of a sudden you have more really productive progress, good days than not, because you start to read and know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it as a caregiver. So I think it's very important. We're trying to come at this in so many different angles. I think this was a fabulous podcast. I think it's giving a lot of our listeners lots of things to think about for their child that they're working with, their teen, and in the adult listening to this, and treatment providers listening to this. So thank you, Dr. Jenna.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Have a great day, listeners. We appreciate you listening to us today, talking about strategies, a specific one, helping prepare through the use of action plans, which is one type of SCAT strategy. Please look at the show notes for some additional supports. But in addition, send us your questions. We love to answer them during podcasts. We bring them into different blogs. We address them. So please reach out at smartcenter@selectivemutismcenter.org / Dr. E, to Dr. Jenna, podcast question, whatever it is you want to say. But we would love to be able to answer these questions in future episodes. And please review our past podcasts. We have so many incredible topics related to the time of year that you're in, different topics on behaviors, on the whys of SM, the bridge, etc. There's probably podcasts for everything you can think about. And guess what? More are coming. Thank you so much, listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Unspoken Words, a Selective Mutism podcast hosted by me, Dr. E, and the Smart Center. This episode and all episodes of Unspoken Words is produced by New Edition Productions. Don't forget to submit any questions you have from today's episode using our Ask Dr. E form on our website. Just head to selectivemutismcenter.org / ask DRE. I'd love to answer your question in a future episode or blog post. Remember, for the best of this episode and every episode of Unspoken Words, please follow the podcast on Instagram and YouTube. We are at Unspoken Words _podcast on Instagram and Unspoken Words by DRE on YouTube. Or join our newsletter for additional SM content. We release new episodes every other Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you next time.